Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about astrology and family, and I'm going to talk about things in the chart which could indicate certain situations with the family. Sometimes when it could indicate death, or could indicate maybe a more auspicious family life, more favorable, certain conditions in the family life, etc. Whether some situations may be contentious, talk a little bit about children, and just various things that are associated with family and indicators in the chart that are can be associated with these matters. Now, well, the first thing off is that I often see, in a lot of charts that have Saturn making an adverse aspect to one's moon, a lot of times this could indicate either contentious situation with the father and with the mother, or they could be divorced or separated. What I've noticed. Another thing that I know, when you look at this as well, the moon is associated with the family as far as the planet that's connected with it. Now, if the moon in your chart makes a predominantly good aspects, this could show often more auspicious for your home and your family life. But if it makes a lot of adverse aspects and it's very strongly afflicted, then in some cases the opposite may be true. It might be some difficulties with the family life, but it's not just, that's not the only thing, of course, that could indicate difficulties with in family life. If you have malefics in the fourth house is another example. If you have, say, Pluto in the fourth, that could indicate upheavals and really power struggles with people in the home life. It could be with your family members. Mars in Cancer or Mars in the fourth could indicate some issues. I have Mars in Cancer, and you could argue it makes a long conjunction to my fourth house cusp in my natal chart, and there have been a number of contentious situations with family members. I even saw one family member one time holding it was like a wrench or something to another family member, and I had to intervene and pretty much break it up through my voice, basically. No physical harm came to anybody, but the thing about it is Mars in Cancer sadly is not really a very good placement. As many of you may know, Mars is in its fall in Cancer. You could say debilitation or what have you. It's in a very bad spot where it could indicate very problematic situations, very contentious, combative situations with home and family life. And it could also show that it's a lot of cases where these people are having really, you're just fighting, almost doing everything but combating their fighting just to keep their existence in their home afloat, and fighting just for those subsistence and survival needs to have a home. I do have Mars in Cancer, so I can relate and empathize with anyone else that may have this. Now, some other things to look at, and as far as your home and your family, there can be some difficulties. Say if you have the ruler of the 12th house and the 4th house in your chart, the ruler of restrictions and limitations in that 4th house of home and family, or vice versa, the ruler of the 4th house in the 12th house can indicate some limitations in the home life. Now, as far as, when you look at you look at a chart and you're looking at matters with home and family, as I stated before, you have Saturn in adverse aspect to the moon in the chart. It could often indicate some kind of separation or divorce with the father and the mother. But remember, the sun is also associated with the father. So if you're born, say when you have if you have the moon opposite the sun, this could indicate also another indicator of some separation in many cases, whether they're actually gone, or whether they're actually it's a divorce or separation, or the situation may be combative or contentious with those family members. And another thing too is, you have to understand, the family, it's not just about, your 4th house, and and the moon, and then Saturn or the sun, because houses, I mean, there's many houses that are associated with different family members. I mean, the third house is associated with siblings and cousins. A lot of times, like if you have, like say on your third house cusp, that sign that is on it can often reflect it. Either it could be a sibling or a cousin that has that sun, moon, or ascendant in that sign, or embodies those characteristics. I have the zodiac sign Cancer on my third house cusp. Now, I don't have any siblings. I have Mars in the third house, which could indicate where Mars is the planet of combat, so it can combat siblings. It's also the ruler of my 12th house of limitations and restrictions. I don't have any I'd have no siblings. I do have cousins though, but in two of those cousins, one of them has a Cancer ascendant, one of them has a Cancer sun. So it's very interesting that I do have Cancer, the zodiac sign Cancer, on the cusp of the third house, on the cusp of the fourth house. It's not just your home and family life in general. It could also indicate the less dominant parent, which is often the mother. Now, I have 1 degree Leo on the cusp of my fourth house, and my mother has a Cancer ascendant at 29 degrees, very close to that degree of Leo. Even though it's a Cancer ascendant, she's on the cusp, and she's 2 degrees away from that 1 degree of Leo on the fourth house cusp. Now, a lot of times, I mean, and as far as like astrology, like and if you're going to have children, thing about it is, of course, you know, the fifth house is about pregnancy, but if it's for men, it could still indicate children in the possibilities in terms of you know, whether you might have an abundance of children, whether you may have some, or whether you don't, maybe may not have any, period. And also the energy associated with the, as far as perhaps the it could indicate certain, you know, like situations with the children or the life with them. I mean, if you have, say, Aquarius on your fifth house cusp in your natal chart, this could indicate in some cases where you might have a child that might be an Aquarius sun, moon, or ascendant, or embody those traits, or it could just indicate certainly maybe unusual situations with the children. There might be something unorthodox or unusual about one or more children, or a rebellious child in some cases. It could be something too, looking at this as well, like in terms of this could be something too. I mean, when I look at mine, like for my, I have Pluto in my fifth house in my natal chart, and I don't have any children. Now, Pluto sometimes can just flat out, I mean, obliterate and destroy whatever it hits, and it's also intercepted, so it makes it a little bit more exasperating and more taxing for me to deal with. And thing about it too is when you have there's other indicators, I mean, in a chart where if you have, like, say, if your moon, I mean, if your moon is unaspected, it's kind of left out alone. You might feel somewhat alone and desolate, or maybe your family has left you, you're feeling that way, and you maybe in some cases you might not have an overabundance of contact with them. And also too, I mean, of course, when you look at the synastry between you and family members, that of course could figure very prominently in terms of your compatibility with them. It's not just looking about at your own chart, of course. It can be about looking at your chart relative to your relatives, and looking at the synastry between those people and you. So I mean, it's very interesting, because I mean, you have these houses that a lot of people don't, I mean some people may know, but I think a lot of people don't realize that some other things I want to talk about as far as astrology and the family, that your sixth house cusp represents an aunt, could be an aunt or an uncle, because it is the third house from the fourth, and it represents your mother, with a less dominant parent, which is often the mother's siblings. And I have Libra on the cusp of my sixth house, and I have an aunt, which is my mother's sister, who has her sun in Libra. So, I mean, that I thought was very interesting. I mean, it's just really, I mean, astrology, I mean, as I've talked about in previous videos, it's like very complex. It's like an intricate piece of machinery with many different proponents and components in it, and you can never learn really and everything about really astrology, no matter how long you study it. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Another thing to talk about too is that sometimes, like through transits, it could indicate certain things that can transpire in association, in conjunction with your family. Somebody having a transit Saturn in their 12th house can lose a father at that time, or some elder or person. Could be a grandfather or a father, older people that are prominent in their life. But I have Saturn in my 12th house in my natal chart, and my father died when I was 3 years old. And I mean, when people have that transit at their 12th, often it could be where the relationship may dissipate with the father, or it could be where the father may actually pass away. And when I had transit Saturn, I believe was in my 8th house, my great-grandfather passed away. And when you have transit Saturn hidden in the 8th house in the chart, that could indicate the death of an older person. Now, going back to the family again, going back at some positive things that can be connected with your chart and your family. Somebody has, again, as I talked about before, the moon has predominantly good aspects. If you have, like, say, if the moon makes a good aspect, a sextile or trine to your natal Jupiter, this could be very auspicious for family life and very fortuitous. Jupiter in the 4th house can sometimes give a very positive, a very fortunate home and family life. But remember, in some cases, though, Jupiter can have the tendency to enlarge and expand, as it is paradoxical. It's very strongly benign and benevolent, but it could also expand issues with the home and the family life. So those are some things to look at as far as your astrology in the home and the family life. I mean, there's so many other things I could talk about as far as this goes, because there's so many, I mean, houses there's so many different houses that are associated with different specific family members that correspond with family members, and it could, depending on the sign of it and planets that are inside the houses and where the ruler, what house the ruler is, it could indicate energies, activities connected with them. You have, say, if you have the if you have the ruler of the 6th house and the 3rd house, for example, that could be a situation where you bring an aunt or an uncle into your daily communications, or it could simply mean that you're bringing your work life to your siblings, that you're getting them maybe involved. You might be getting them involved in your work life, because the 6th house is also about employment, and the 3rd house can be connected with siblings. So those are, some things to look at as far as astrology and the family goes. Now, and really, there's really not much more I can say about this at this time, because there are so many different things, elements in the chart that are associated with one's home and family. You can go on, you may be able to go on for hours talking about different things in a chart that are connected with one's home and family. I guess the only one thing I wanted to touch up on, if I talked about it briefly, I will elaborate on it. If I didn't talk about it, I'll talk about it a little bit now. As far as like pregnancy and having children in a chart, a lot of that can be dependent, predicated. Well, for one thing, the sign on the cusp of the 5th house. If you have a fruitful sign such as Cancer on the cusp of the 5th house, this could be a little bit more favorable for children. Jupiter in the 5th house, of course, could be very auspicious if the 5th house ruler is favorably aspected and makes predominantly good aspects. That could be something else to look at as well. I understand men don't actually physically have children. They can't be impregnated, but it still could indicate for a man, depending on the sign on the cusp of the fifth house and other elements associated with the fifth house, whether they may have children, maybe there's a propensity to have children or not. I have a barren sign on the cusp of the fifth house, and I also have a barren sign intercepted in the fifth. And the fact that my fifth house is intercepted does not help. As I stated before, I have Pluto in the fifth house, and Pluto can obliterate and destroy. Saturn can restrict. Pluto can flat out obliterate and destroy. I have Leo on the cusp of the fifth, a barren sign. Virgo is intercepted in the fifth house, and that is again, that is that is a barren sign as well. So I think that definitely plays a role in terms of not having, as far as me not having children and my moon. It's interesting because again, this is a classic example of looking at the whole chart, because if people were to just isolate my sun and having the sun in Cancer, it said, oh, Eddie, oh, Cancer is the sign, it's life-giving, you should probably have a lot of children. The home and family often dominate Cancer. Cancers can have very large families, but that's the thing, you can't, as I stated at the end of a lot of my videos, that you can't isolate any component in a chart, people. You have to look at the whole chart, as it is very intricate and very complex. A lot of times it's a matter of seeing what energies are going to outweigh what other energies that might say one thing, and looking at the other energies that might overpower it to some degree. You look at again, and looking at this, I mean, as well, the chart, I have the moon in Gemini as well, and moon in Gemini often don't want to be pinned down, and if you're don't want to be pinned down and you don't marry, then there increases the chances of not having children. Yes, plenty of people are unmarried and have children, but there are a lot of people also that will only have children and want to procreate if they are actually married. So if you have, you have Gemini prominent in your chart, a lot of times this could be, and I'm not saying all Geminis are like this, because people that have Gemini sun, moon, or ascendant like this, but because I'm sure that, there's a lot obviously that do have good sized families, but there's some people that have Gemini prominent in their chart that I believe don't want to be pinned down, and if you don't want to be pinned down, it could often indicate not being married, and then because of that you may not have children. I also have, and also there's other aspects in the chart that can, and maybe to some degree they're indirectly involved in what I'm describing. I also have Saturn making an adverse aspect to my Venus, which could be an aspect where often the person may not become married or have a significant other. And as far as that goes, that could be another indicator which could be playing that role and not having children. So anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment for Astrology and Family. And until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying stay well.